If you've ever worked with pigments and struggled with consistency, clumping, or dull results, this video is going to change the way you mix them. Today, I'm walking you step by step through how I mix black diamond pigments for acrylic pour painting, specifically for a Dutch pour consistency and a thicker consistency for bloom and swipe techniques. Same pigments, to completely different behaviors. I love working with black diamond because of their vibrancy, the intensity of their shimmer, and the fact that their variety packs make it affordable to experiment with multiple colors without committing to large containers. My absolute favorite is the interference pack. The dimension you get from those colors is unreal. I actually use them in my electric ribbon pour tutorial. I'll link that at the end because once you see how they activate, you'll understand why I love them so much. In this video, I'm going to show you exactly how I disperse the pigments, how I avoid overwatering them, how I adjust for Dutch pours, and how I thicken the mixture if I want stronger cell activation for blooms or swipes. If you're serious about getting vibrant, luminous results with pigment powders in fluid art, let's get into it. Before we start, just a quick note. Whenever I work with pigment powders, I always wear a mask. These are very fine particles and they can float in the air longer than we realize, especially while mixing. For me, safety comes first. Even if I'm working at arm's length, that doesn't really prevent particles from becoming airborne, so wearing a mask is simply part of my studio protocol. Of course, every artist chooses what works best for them. This is just a precaution I personally follow whenever I'm handling dry pigments. Please research and follow the safety practices that feel right for you and your workspace. Now, let's mix. I start with a half teaspoon of pigment. These bags contain about 1 teaspoon, give or take. I'm mixing enough for this tutorial and for a painting I'm doing later. The first thing I add is golden wedding aid. Just 2 drops for about half a teaspoon of pigment. I'm not using it to thin the paint. I'm using it to help the pigment fully disperse. These powders are extremely fine, so without something to break that surface tension, they can clump, sit on top, or leave little dry pockets in your mix. You don't have to use wetting aid, but if you skip it, you might notice speckling, and even color payoff, or tiny clumps that show up later in your pour. And once that's on the canvas, it's hard to fix. So for me, those 2 drops make a big difference in getting a smooth, consistent mixture. Next, I add just enough water to fully cover the pigments. For about half a teaspoon of powder, roughly half a teaspoon of water is usually enough to soak it all up. The goal here is to make sure every particle is fully wet. I mix until it turns into a smooth, lump-free paste consistency. No dry pockets, no floating specks. Once everything is evenly saturated, you'll get a much more consistent color payoff in your pour. Now, some artists prefer to disperse pigments with alcohol, varnish, or even straight pouring medium. Alcohol can break surface tension quickly and help with dispersion, but it evaporates fast and can slightly change how the paint behaves. Pouring medium already contain acrylic binders, so they integrate smoothly into the mix, but they are more expensive to use, so it's up to you which one you have handy. Now I'm adding my pouring base. Most fluid artists work with either Floetrol or Oatrol, so I'm going with that option here. I'm adding about 2 full tablespoons of Oatrol. Here is the important difference. If you're using a true acrylic pouring medium, like the one you're seeing here from Golden, you don't need anything else. It already contains enough acrylic binder to properly hold the pigment together. But if you are using Floetrol or Oatrol, I prefer to add an acrylic binder. I have 2 binder options here, Atelier and Pivio. They are both excellent, but they behave differently. Atelier is very fluid, almost watery, so it integrates easily without affecting consistency much. Pivio, on the other hand, has a creamy consistency. It's still very smooth and mixes beautifully, but it has a slightly richer body. The good news is it won't noticeably thicken your paint, especially in small amounts. Pivio is the one I'll be using. Now, what if you don't have a binder? Just use your Floetrol alone. I've done it and it works. For me, adding a small amount of binder just gives me that extra insurance. It's about longevity and structure. So I'm adding about half a teaspoon of the Pivio binder to my 2 tablespoons of Oatrol, and then I'll mix everything until it's completely smooth and uniform. And here I have a beautiful consistency for a Dutch pour, especially for those of you who prefer a zero trace flow. But what if you want to thicken this mix? Well, let me introduce you to my nemesis, gel gloss. There is also a Golden heavy gel gloss and Liquitex heavy gel gloss, which I absolutely love. I just don't have any at the moment. Now, here is the trick. Don't add gel gloss directly into your main cup. If you do, you'll be mixing until the end of time, trying to break down those clumps. Instead, scoop your gel gloss into a separate container first. Then slowly add a small amount of your pigment mixture into the gel and mix that until it's completely smooth. Once it turns into a creamy, lump-free blend, you can transfer it back into your main cup if you desire. This method gives you control, keeps everything silky smooth, and helps you reach the thicker consistency you want for blooms or swipe techniques without frustration. Let's test this with a quick bloom. I'm placing the cell activator right on top of this pigment mix so you can see how it responds, especially at this thicker consistency. This is a recipe I've tested multiple times and it has never disappointed me. It gives me vibrancy, control, and consistency, whether I'm doing a Dutch pour or switching to blooms and swipes. And that's my full process for mixing my pigments. If you want to see these pigments in action, especially the interference colors, in a full composition, make sure you watch my electric ribbon pour next. That's where you'll really see the dimension and shimmer come to life. I'll link it right after this. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next one.